Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Peter Spezia, and we're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. This week's game on a solo episode is the shift of an iconic first-person shooter franchise from its original creative team to its future with a new developer entirely, while adding an emotional personal touch to the narrative. 2012's Halo 4. That's right, it's a solo episode this week. Normally my co-host Joe DeVader is here and we cover 2 games, and well, just one game this week. We're helping him recover from some vocal issues. Was getting dangerously close to losing his voice there. So you know what? Joe, take it easy. We'll get you back next week. No worries. As I tend to do on these solo episodes, I make things a little dangerously close for myself. Kind of researching, recording, editing, and publishing all in one day. It's living a little dangerously. And today is January 18th, 2022. No relevance for that date in particular, especially while we're talking about a Microsoft game on one of the biggest news stories in the game industry, but we'll leave that story for next time when Joe's back. We're recording a few days from now anyway, so we'll be talking about that story, don't worry. Again, no theme this week. We normally have themes for our 2 games, and, well, when we just have one game, it's let's say it's an important Microsoft Xbox game in this important Microsoft Xbox Day. Let's talk about some composer follow-up news before we get into that, though. In the week before, kind of collecting news stories that relate to the composers that we've talked about in the past on the show, because they still do great things and they're still working hard in the industry or other industries. So let's talk about the Game Music Festival. The 2022 installment is in London, and it's a festival where there's concerts, panels, and meet and greets with video game music, and this year includes Christopher Madigan, Gareth Coker, and Kristen Nygus, all 3 of whom we've covered on this show, because they'll be there to perform music from Cuphead and the Ori series. I know a listener of ours who's going to the show, and that's in March of this year, so hopefully we're gonna poke and prod him and maybe get some feedback on what it was like to go there, because that's got to be a really cool opportunity. On the video game front, Assassin's Creed The Ezio Collection comes to Nintendo Switch on February 17th. That will feature music from Jesper Kyd, especially when we covered him for his work on Assassin's Creed 2. I'm surprised this didn't come to the Switch first. We already had the Rebel Collection with Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag and Assassin's Creed Rogue, but good games to finally get on Switch. At least they're not in the cloud, that's for sure. Hitman Trilogy is launching as a bundle on January 20th, and it will be available on Xbox Game Pass. This features music by Niels by Nielsen, who we covered for his work on 2016's Hitman. Hitman 2016, Hitman 2 from 2018, Hitman 3, all there, it's coming to Steam, finally. You get the PS4, PS5, and all the Xbox versions, so that's big, but it's also adding a bunch of Year 2 content over the years, as IO Interactive announced. So VR mode will be coming to PC, not just what was on PlayStation VR, and that'll be included in that Hitman Trilogy pack. The Year 2 content, especially when it comes to Hitman 3, includes a freelancer roguelike single-player mode that's coming in spring 2022, the Elusive Target Arcade that will be day 1 with the trilogy, and a new map that will be coming later in 2022, codenamed Rocky. So, all is not over yet for the Hitman trilogy. Should be a big year for 2022 for that trilogy. We talk about different award shows and how they announce their nominees, and one of the big ones we've been waiting on is DICE. And so the DICE nominees have been announced. For Outstanding Achievement in Original Music Composition, the nominees are Deathloop, It Takes Two, Kena Bridge of Spirits, Psychonauts 2, and Returnal. I think those were all games we had in our honorable mentions for 2021. Interesting. Their Game of the Year nominees are Deathloop, Inscription, It Takes Two, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and Returnal. That should be a pretty good collection of games there. Should be interesting to see what happens at DICE. Also, the Game Developers' Choice Awards had their nominees announced. For Best Audio, it's Returnal, Unpacking, Deathloop, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, and Forza Horizon 5. Again, when you have a category of Best Audio, that also takes into the sound mixing. It's not just the score and the music there. For what it's worth, their Game of the Year nominees are Inscription, Forza Horizon 5, Resident Evil Village, Deathloop, and It Takes Two. And now we wait on the BAFTAs. Looking forward to seeing what happens with that award show. So on this big Microsoft day, let's talk about one of their games from about 10 years ago. One of their big ones for sure. Let's talk about Halo 4. And this isn't the first time we've mentioned Halo on the show. We covered Halo Combat Evolved in episode 46, and then Halo 3 in episode 128. So we get to Halo 4, which is certainly a big title for the franchise and marking a big transition. It released November 6th, 2012 on Xbox 360. It was then included as part of Halo the Master Chief Collection, which released on Xbox One on November 11th, 2014. It was then updated for Xbox Series S and X, as well as included in the Master Chief Collection's port to PC on November 17th, 2020. The game was developed by 313 Industries and published by Microsoft Studios. It is pretty much your typical Halo game. It's a first-person shooter in a 3D environment where the player attacks aliens with a variety of weapons and explosives, all while a cinematic story is told through cutscenes and in-game events. A third-person perspective is used when the player operates vehicles, such as all-terrain vehicles or alien hovercraft, and there are armor abilities in this game that are carried over from Halo Reach, which was released a couple years before. The story of Halo 4, well, it takes place 4 years after the events of Halo 3, where Master Chief and his AI companion Cortana have been left stranded in unknown space. But they drift toward a planet called Requiem, and they crash land there and encounter a new branch of their old foes, the Covenant, as well as mechanical warriors known as the Promethean Knights, and they were established by the Forerunners, which are an ancient and advanced race that the Covenant revere as gods. Cortana reveals that she is experiencing rampancy, a declining mental state that is faced by smart AIs past their usual 7-year lifespan. When a human ship called the UNSC Infinity discovers Requiem, Chief and Cortana try to deactivate what they believe are communication jammers, but they unwittingly release the Didact, an ancient Forerunner warrior, from imprisonment. The Didact believes that man is unworthy of the galaxy's mantle of responsibility, and he wants to use a device called the Composer to convert warriors under his command, with the ultimate goal of targeting Earth. Can Master Chief find immunity from the Composer and stop the Didact? And will he be able to cure Cortana of her rampancy? This is where I would ask Joe what our experiences with Halo 4 are, but since he's not here, oh gosh, let's talk about my experiences with the game. I played it, I beat it. I remember the emotional core of the story because I think that's the most important thing of what the franchise tries to do going forward is what do we do with the Chief and Cortana partnership and how can we make that more dynamic and unique and original? And I like what they do with it or what they tried to do with it, but let's just say this trilogy, the Reclaimer saga, hasn't gone especially how 343 planned it to. So I enjoyed playing the game, but I feel like overall the big Halo lore, like the Forerunners getting involved, is all lost on me. I've talked about with Halo before. It's a big series to try to get into as far as like understanding its lore. And especially when I played the earlier games in the trilogy, ODST, Reach, it feels like a lot of with the linear game design, it's like go here, kill the things, do the next thing. And it hasn't been a series that I really dove into as far as the lore and what the moving pieces are. But when you talk about the Chief and Cortana relationship, I think that's an important emotional core and definitely one of the highlights of this game. And interesting with this game also, the soundtrack. I mean, we were used to the Halo sound, and we've covered with Combat Evolved in Halo 3. Like, what do you expect a Halo game to sound like with Marty O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore? Well, when you have a completely new, uplifted soundtrack here for Halo 4 with the help of Neil Davidge and Kazuma Jinouchi, it's a new sound. It's not a totally new sound, but they say it's an evolved sound. And I feel like that's why it was important to bring this to the show today. I wanted to talk about it when Halo Infinite released. And when it ended up releasing, it just happened to be too close to when we covered Halo 3 last. So I'm like, you know what? Give it some breath. I happen to be playing Halo Infinite right now. So I feel it's timely to talk about this. And then this big news on January 18th happened with Microsoft and Activision Blizzard. And you know what? It just happened to fit. Trust me, this was planned to be this date for quite a while. And ta-da! Surprise! Well, let's talk about the development of Halo 4. And it starts with October 2007, where shortly after the release of Halo 3, Halo developer Bungie split off from its parent company, Microsoft. Now, Microsoft retained the intellectual property and rights to Halo, but Bungie ended up continuing developing Halo games until 2010. This would include Halo 3 ODST and Halo Reach. Then in 2009, Microsoft established 343 Industries as the development team that would take over future first-party Halo game development. Staff started with about a dozen people, but then the team grew to nearly 200. By the time Halo 4 was all said and done, over 350 people ended up working on the game, including contractors, at some point. It was important for 343 to establish their own Halo identity. In fact, they hired people who, quote, hated Halo because of X. The idea that they didn't like Halo because of this, but they wanted to take these new ideas and find a way to improve what they don't like about Halo. It wasn't just like, let's get all the Halo fans together in one room and keep making what we've always done. No, it's just a way to grow and implement new ideas. And so Halo 4 was meant to be the first part of the Reclaimer saga. And this would be a trilogy of games that would explore the impact of the Forerunners. And we mentioned the Forerunners in the plot recap, but to this point, the Forerunners were considered a mysterious and mythical part of the original Halo lore. So it gave 343 some opportunity to go and explore this part of what is Halo, who are the Forerunners. And so the development team realized at this point, when you have this Halo Bible, this book of Halo, and all the narrative that's come before, they realized that Halo 4's narrative could be dense and hard to approach, making it inaccessible for new players, or players who've played the other games, like myself. But they found incorporating this idea of Cortana having this rampancy, mixing in this storyline into an action game, they found it at first to be extremely challenging, and they actually considered dropping it during development. But creative director Josh Holmes was adamant about including it. He actually took inspiration from his mother's battle with dementia, and she was diagnosed with this near the start of the game's development. So this led Holmes to want to capture the emotion and tell, quote, a perfect story. Is it perfect? I don't know about that, but it certainly does hit an emotional core. There was also the cooperative Spartan Ops mode that it originally began as a firefight type mode from Halo Reach. And if you're unfamiliar with this, it was basically a horde mode with waves of enemies. Then you had to work with other players to try to keep battling these enemies, keep knocking wave after wave after wave. So this firefight mode originally was composed of just having different objective-oriented mission types, but it ended up turning into an episodic story that took place 6 months after Halo 4's events, and it also tied in with the Infinity multiplayer mode, but that also set up some things for the sequel. It was 10 missions, and that was really meant to be designed for 4-player co-op. The game was announced at E3 2011, and it was announced alongside Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary. A gameplay demo would be shown for the first time a year later. Microsoft Studios Vice President Phil Spencer, because remember, this is still the Don Matrick years, he stated that the Halo franchise is, quote, the most important entertainment product in the company, and that at the time, Halo 4 was the most expensive game that Microsoft had made. So a big deal, kind of betting big on 343 Industries to take the franchise to its next generation, its next steps. And as a result, the part of the most expensive game that Microsoft had made, that comes with a ton of marketing. That includes a lot of trailers, a live-action web series called Halo 4 Forward Unto Dawn, another partnership with PepsiCo that included an iOS and Android app game called Halo 4 King of the Hill fueled by Mountain Dew. Did not know that existed, as well as a 50-foot diameter illuminated didact glyph that was flown by a helicopter on launch night over the River Thames in London. So putting a lot and betting big on Halo 4. It ended up working out. The game reviewed well with a Metacritic average of 87. Critics praised 343's efforts to continue the series so well, with gameplay that felt good, impressive visuals, especially for the end of the Xbox 360, and a more personal and emotional story that was well paced, plus a complimentary score. Some critics thought, though, that some plot points were hard to follow. The tech at the end of the Xbox 360's life cycle was kind of constraining the game's overall vision, and the soundtrack was questioned for its avoidance of the main Halo theme. The game grossed $220 million on its launch day, which was a record for the franchise, with 1 million people playing in its first 24 hours. The game sold almost 9 million copies as of July 2015. Halo 4 was nominated for 8 Spike Video Game Awards, including Best Original Score, and it won 2 for Best Xbox 360 Game and Best Graphics. It was nominated for 4 BAFTAs, but it didn't win any, and it was nominated for 6 DICE Awards, winning 2 for Outstanding Achievement in Connectivity and Visual Engineering. Several outlets had Halo 4 as their best shooter of the year, even beating Call of Duty Black Ops 2. The legacy of the game, there would be paid multiplayer DLC with map packs. I'm pretty sure that would all be bundled into Halo the Master Chief Collection anyway, but get that DLC money while they could. Of course, then the Master Chief Collection came out, and it kind of upscaled a couple years later to run well on Xbox One. And then you'd have the Reclaimer saga continue with 2015's Halo 5 Guardians, where they decided to try a different tact with Cortana. But then development for what was originally seen as Halo 6, that would be 2021's Halo Infinite, that development got pretty rocky. And it also kind of just canned the story that 4 and 5 were setting up. When they're trying to set up like the next 10 years of Halo, so to speak, with a living, breathing world that they can maybe add expansions to, granted, I haven't finished the campaign yet, so I'm maybe like halfway through. But yeah, they kind of just ditch all the things that they were working on in 4 and 5, and it's like, yeah, here's a new story. You can join in fresh. Join the world of Halo, maybe for the first time. It's just interesting to see what has happened with the Reclaimer saga. So last time on the show, when we talked about who we were talking about next week, I said, I'm going to talk about Kazuma Jinochi. And he's a composer we mentioned briefly in our Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker episode. So I'm like, yeah, he's on this game. Let's talk about him. And then I learned that he was not the main composer by any means. So let's talk about the main composer for Halo 4 this week. And that's Neil Davidge. Neil Davidge was born on June 29th, 1962 in Bristol, England. He is, quote, an English record producer, songwriter, film score composer, musician, and occasional backing vocalist. On his website, he says, quote, having learned guitar thanks to punk's DIY ethic, Neil later embarked upon long hours of alchemical suck-it-and-see experimentation as he learned the complex but rewarding art of sound recording. In 1996, he hooked up with Massive Attack on The Hunter Gets Captured by the Game, a song for the Batman Forever soundtrack. That same year, Massive Attack won a Brit Award for Best Dance Act, thus cementing a working relationship with Neil Davidge that would continue for some 17 years. Now, Massive Attack is a trip-hop collective musical group, and Davidge would play bass, guitars, drums, keyboards, piano, and give some occasional backing vocals for them over the time he spent working with them. Massive Attack has released 5 studio albums. Davidge performed on one of them, but he ended up producing 3 of them. Neil Davidge has worked as a producer with Uncle, Damon Albarn, Elizabeth Fraser, Mos Def, David Bowie, and Snoop Dogg, just to name a few. And he released his debut solo album, Slow Light, S-L-O Light, under the name Davidge in 2014. You can follow him on Twitter at Neil Davidge, Neildavige. So as far as Neil Davidge's discography, the only game that he's really composed for is Halo 4. But it was interesting looking up on his website, there's a song by Massive Attack called Teardrop, and that was used in a trailer for the original Assassin's Creed, and you listen to it, it's like, oh yeah, oh I've heard this before. So interesting to have that tie-in there. For TV, it seems to be like he's composed recently for a lot of British TV series, such as Spotless, New Blood, In the Dark, Hard Sun, and Britannia. Some films that he's composed for, whether it's for Massive Attack or on his own, there's Unleashed, Bullet Boy, In Prison My Whole Life, which was a collaboration there with Snoop Dogg, Trouble the Water, Push, and additional music for Clash of the Titans. So the Halo 4 soundtrack is primarily composed by Neil Davidge, with some extra work from Kazuma Jinouchi. Davidge was a Halo fan who was honored to have the chance to write the music for the games. He intended to add a touch of romance to the score, he put it, as well as adding more electronic sounds while keeping Halo's style. He says, quote, "The phrase that kept going around was evolution, not revolution of the score. They wanted a more electronic, slightly more beat-driven direction, which is one reason why they came to me. They wanted to flesh out, sonically, a new universe, one that they could expand on in subsequent sequels." And so how do they do that? Well, first 343 hired audio director Sotaro Tojima, who is best known for his work on Konami's Castlevania Circle of the Moon and Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots, so he served as Halo 4's audio director. Another former Konami employee, Kazuma Jinouchi, remember we mentioned him briefly in working on Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, and that came out in 2010. He joined 343 Industries during production in 2011, and he would help create a few new tracks. He would then stay on to be the sole composer for Halo 5 Guardians. Now, many of the live recording sessions for Halo 4 took place at Abbey Road Studios and Angel Recording Studios, and both of these are in London, but several occurred in Tasmania, Australia. Some of these recording sessions, though, actually took place in generally inhospitable environments, such as underwater, in fire, and in ice, through the use of specially designed microphones. There were also other recording sessions that utilized homemade explosives. See, Tojima intended for the game's audio to be clearly grounded in the Halo universe, while having a more realistic quality than in past titles. And I get that. You know, a lot of the early work, especially for Halo, was really done with PC synths and all that. So if you're going into a new generation, let's try some new methods of recording and making the sound more impactful. Volume 1 of the Halo 4 soundtrack was released on October 22nd, 2012, with Jinouchi contributing one track there, with Davidge composing the rest. And then Volume 2 was released on April 8th, 2013. This had some more atmospheric tracks and some more work from Jinouchi. But the Volume 1 album debuted at number 50 on the Billboard 200 chart in the United States, making it the highest charting game soundtrack ever at the time. So what does the Halo 4 soundtrack sound like? How is it different than that original trilogy? Well, let's get to the Critical 5 for Halo 4. And we start with To Galaxy. To Galaxy is composed by Neil Davidge, as are many of these tracks except one, and we'll note that because it's coming up next. But To Galaxy, the beginning of the piece is heard in the multiplayer menu. But I like this part, this clip from the piece. And I feel like it's more representative of like, this is the evolution of Halo, right? It sounds a lot like it would be a Halo track, kind of borrowing from Marty O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore's work, but bigger, more, realistic instruments, live recorded orchestra, because we're streaming music now at this point. And it just sounds so good. You have the brass, you have the strings, the percussion is really strong here, and it sets a really good pace, but it's a nice, strong melody. And it's not one of the main themes in the game for sure, especially even that multiplayer menu theme that we didn't include. It's a little more low-key, it's subtle with, a cello that kind of comes in. But again, it's driven by percussion there, as Halo themes tend to be. I just feel like listening to this one, like it's a good sense of like, yeah, this is the next step of Halo. But how can it sound different? How can we implement that into a main theme for the next step of the Halo franchise? And that involves number 2 on the Critical 5 here. And this is 117. This is the one. This is the one track on the Volume 1 soundtrack that was composed by Kazuma Jinouchi. And you can tell, can't you? It sounds a little different. If anything, it sounds like Metal Gear. I just think it's really interesting that it's like, you hear this bit play and it's like, oh, that could come out from, Peace Walker, Metal Gear Solid 5, whatever have you. And so that kind of makes sense, taking some inspiration there. This is one of the main themes of the game, and it makes sense when Master Chief is kind of also known as John 117, Spartan 117. Like, that's his code name. So you're kind of adding a new theme for Master Chief here, which is then interesting and kind of controversial when, the main Halo theme, the like, that's not really in this game. If anything, we're leaning more on this da 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 da. Like, that is kind of like a main theme for a new Halo generation, and it's interesting. So this plays among several places in the game. It plays in the campaign mission Infinity, when John 117 activates UNSC Infinity's MAC cannons, and it forces the Didact to retreat in his cryptum. It also plays as well in the final cutscene in Epilogue. I also think not only is this sound so cool and it's an important theme and it sounds a little bit like, what if Metal Gear were in Halo? But the clip here, when it starts kind of picking up the energy, the piece starts a little slower, but when this clip hits and it picks up the energy, what's the timestamp on that in the piece? Oh, is it 1 minute 17 seconds? You don't say. It starts at 117. Huh. That's really clever, and I really appreciate that. So yeah, a really important one to include here in the Critical 5. Let's get to the next one though. Number 3 on the Critical 5 for Halo 4. This is Revival. Ah, yes, nothing like having a character theme for a big bad in the game. So, Revival is composed, of course, we're back to themes composed by Neil Davidge, and this is generally considered the theme of the Didact. It plays several times in the campaign, first in the campaign mission Forerunner, when the Didact awakes from his cryptum and faces John 117 for the first time. So yes, the Didact theme, the chorus, the chorals, the vocals didn't go anywhere. In fact, they got added to this theme, and boy, it sounds so good. It sounds so ominous. Just a great job composing this one. It's not among, fans' favorites in the series for sure, but I think it's really important because it establishes the Didact as a real threat. And boy, is he. Again, what a shame that, yeah, okay, the Didact is defeated at the end, but then in the secret ending, he's back, he's still a threat. And then I guess, in a book or something like that, he's killed because then he doesn't really show up in Halo 5. Again, they didn't really seem to have a big coherent thought of what they could do with the character going forward. Because, yeah, the Didact could have been a real threat for sure. And this music theme really sells that. I think it's an important one to kind of show the darker side of the theming here. And it's just a really strong piece. As we get to the final stretch of the campaign, though, let's play this track, number 4 on the Critical 5 for Halo 4. This is Arrival. This piece by Neil Davidge plays near the end of the Halo 4 level Midnight. It's in the last area when John 117 fights through Prometheans, and it's moments before the composer's activation. So, just before the big climax of the piece, it makes me think a lot of, not only narratively, but also musically, of Mass Effect 2's Suicide Mission. Now, I think Suicide Mission is a better piece, in the game and musically? I do. But I feel like there's an important aspect here where it's, really amping up the stakes. And you hear in that, when the big drum comes in that clip, you feel it. You have the key change a little bit and the stakes are up. But it really just has that Suicide Mission feel to me. And it just really sounds good. And I wanted to include it here because of that kind of comparison, but also just it sounds great musically, and wanted to put that here. Had to wrap up the Critical 5 though with this piece, number 5. This is Green and Blue. How do you pay off the core of the emotional storytelling that you're trying to end this game on? With a piece like that, the piece like Green and Blue. Now, the piece starts in a really interesting way. It's really quiet and a lot of electronic noises, kind of like some, not really static, but just kind of some high-pitched electronic noises. And then this piano piece comes in with this da da da, and it's just so emotional. But then you want to try, turning up the emotion past 10 to 11 and beyond. This hit here is you want people to cry at this moment, and it's powerful. So this piece overall, Green and Blue, not only in the title does it make sense, it represents the relationship between Master Chief, John 117, and Cortana, especially as she fractures, that relationship fractures. The piece plays primarily and most memorably when Cortana tells Master Chief of her rampancy, and their final conversation together kind of comes back that way. I mean, wow. This is one where you should probably listen to the full thing. And I feel like it also hits better if you go through the story. And let's get into some spoilers. I'm not spoiling much for 2012's Halo 4, but at the time we thought, this is the end. We've lost Cortana forever. She's not coming back. And then in Halo 5, they make the choice to have her come back and be the antagonist. And then Halo Infinite, we dealt with her. This is new. world, and it's me, Weapon, to be the Cortana killer / replacement. It's a little weird, but at the time, this is kind of an emotional moment when, this character that we've known for 10 plus years, this relationship that's defined this iconic first person shooter franchise, it's ending. And wow, Davidge put everything into this piece. It sounds so good. Had to have it here. Wrap up the Critical 5. Some tracks on the cutting room floor, though. I have 2. The first of these is Requiem. This is one of the big musical moments of the campaign, and honestly, this one almost made the Critical 5. It could have replaced Revival, it could have replaced Arrival, but we have it here on the cutting room floor, and so this plays in the campaign level Requiem when Master Chief sees the UNSC Forward Unto Dawn's crash site and sees the floating Forerunner towers inside Requiem. And it's just one of these big, towering structure looming over you moments that, everything is bigger than you. And that really hits with this musical impact. Just a big moment. And it's actually a piece that had some composer notes where Neil Davidge says, quote, "The track opens with low strings playing somberly before a cantiled joins in with snippets, leading to a cascade of melodies with high strings accompaniments. They build up to a crescendo before strings return with a grand melody, which repeats before fading out with snippets of synth effects and cantilla." So yeah, it's just one of those big musical hits. It's a memorable moment from the campaign. Honestly, could have been in the Critical 5, but it's here. The other one on the cutting room floor is an interesting choice. This is Desecration. As I've usually done with these Halo episodes, I've consulted my brother Mark, who is a much bigger Halo fan than I am, to just say, what do you think about this Critical 5, these cutting room floor tracks? Am I on the right track? What am I missing here? What would you include? And this was one of Mark's big suggestions, because Desecration is a bonus track. It's not on the main OST. It's an exclusive downloadable track that's in the special limited edition. But it plays in the mission Reclaimer when you fight the Lich, and it's also used frequently in Spartan Ops. And I know Mark was a big fan of playing that Spartan Ops mode. So, kind of leading him to pick this one, and boy, it sounds good. Totally would have missed it, but it does play a prominent role in that Spartan Ops mode. So I figure it's a good inclusion here on the cutting room floor. Needs a little more love, especially because this is quintessential, that evolution of the Halo sound, getting the big drums, the strings in here, and it's all these live recorded orchestras, just sounds so good. The next step, not, a revolution, but a perfect example of this is hype, epic Halo music for a new generation with a new developer. So what will I never forget about the game? Honestly, it's the Cortana story, and with rampancy and all that. And yeah, you'd think she's gone, and then no, she's not, because I remember fighting some of the Promethean Knights, and you get some new weapons there, and okay, it's metal with some red orange light. I do have that kind of visual in mind, and I remember the towers with Requiem, but there isn't too much I remember from the Halo 4 campaign, and maybe that's a mistake. I've gone back and played the original games a couple times, and maybe I just need to do that better, I suppose, with a more cognizant eye of the story, and not just you're not just going from one to the other. Granted, I'm enjoying a lot of Halo Infinite, and I think that's maybe just my penchant for open world design and gameplay, but it's interesting even then when you get to that campaign and it's you go into corridors in these big structures where, yeah, you have that linear Halo gameplay. So like in the main campaign, nothing's really changed. It's interesting there. But Halo 4, I think 343 did a good job to pick up the massive weight of, Bungie and that legacy and carry it on as their own. Granted, there were stumbles certainly with the Master Chief Collection and all of that, making sure everything works. But, really they've kind of spun it into their own. And even with Infinite's development struggles, hopefully they're setting themselves up for the long term. But 4 was a really important piece in taking that franchise into a new generation, the next 10 years, a new developer. So I think it's important there. And the soundtrack, certainly, as you've heard, definitely worthy of being mentioned. So that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. Again, we'll be back to a regular 2-person episode next time. And you can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakEasy. Joe, my co-host, is over at StringPixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast that you want, and that's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Smasher Pieces, is hosted, and you can find Smasher Pieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify even. Because sure, we have a Spotify podcast feed where we have these episodes, but we also have a Spotify playlist where if we talk about a video game track on this show and it's on Spotify, it's getting added to this monster playlist. And it looks like Halo 4 is indeed on Spotify, so we'll be adding those tracks there. When you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. Leave some feedback for us. How are we doing with these episodes? Also, give us suggestions for games to cover in 2022. That's one of our big pushes, continuing last year's work. Who are we talking about next week? Well, Joe will be talking about Shinichiro Nakamura, and I will be talking about Tsukasa Tawada. Oh yes, it's a big theme for sure. Maybe tied into a big release that's coming up. How is it the end of January already soon? Oh my goodness. Well, to play us out, we like to highlight a fan cover, a fan remix, whether it's on YouTube, OC Remix, wherever, and found a piece here called Reaching the Core by Yafet Metza, Jafetmeza. His YouTube channel name is Yafet Metza, graphic designer and film score composer, and this piece of his Reaching the Core is a remake of 117. So taking that main Halo 4 theme that Kazuma Jinochi composed and bringing it into this new take. So please enjoy that. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.